St. Peter reminds us in sacred scripture to sanctify Christ as Lord in our hearts, always being ready to make a defense to anyone who asks for a reason for the hope that is in us, with gentleness and respect. This is exactly what I want to do in this video. I would like to share why I am a Christian and why I think it is in the best interest of every person to become a Christian. I don't mean this in a coercive manner. Rather, I believe that I have found something both good and true, and I want to share why I believe Christianity is good and true out of love of neighbor. There is a lot more that I can add on each of the following points, but for the sake of brevity, I will only share a basic outline for why I am a Christian. But before I begin, I would like to offer a point of clarification. I am not going to offer a necessary proof of the faith. I actually can't do that. The truths of the faith exceed the human mind. And so if I were to offer a necessary proof of the faith, then I would actually be undermining the faith. That said, I am still able to offer a defense of the faith. For since truth cannot contradict truth, there cannot be any truths of reason that contradict truths of faith. This is why St. Peter says not to always have your proof, but rather to be ready to make a defense. This is also St. Thomas Aquinas' point in his Reasons for the Faith, a work he offers in defense of Christianity against Muslim objections. So in short, I am not offering a proof in the strict sense, but rather a defense and reason for why I believe Christianity is true. And with that out of the way, let's begin. So, my first point is this. We cannot want what we do not know. Do you desire gargantuas? Probably not, because you most likely don't even know what a gargantua is. And I myself just made up the word. I'm not even sure if it really is a thing itself. So if we desire something, we have to have at least some knowledge of it. This is the first point. If we desire something, we have to know the thing we are desiring, at least in some vague or confused manner. Our second point is this. All of us desire happiness. This is not a mere Christian truth that is known by faith. Rather, this is something evident to all. We all desire happiness. Even Aristotle, a pagan, makes this point in Book 1, Chapter 4 of the Ethics. He notes how everyone desires happiness, even though not everyone agrees on what happiness is. For example, some take happiness to be pleasure. Others take happiness to be wealth, good fortune, virtue, and many other things. But regardless, all of us desire to be happy. Now, in the following chapter, Chapter 5, Aristotle argues that happiness, actually, let me backtrack. He recounts three major kinds of life, three major kinds of lifestyles, and he offers an account of whether each of these lifestyles are adequate. Now, of these three lives, there are the life of pleasure, the political life, and what he calls the contemplative life, the life of contemplation. This is the life that is pursued by the few philosophers. Now, Aristotle argues that happiness does not lie in pleasure, because the life of pleasure is common to other animals like cows or dogs. But we don't want the life of a cow or a dog. We want the happy life of a human being. So if we reduce happiness to pleasure, then we are actually saying that we should live an undignified life, a life that is akin to the lower animals rather than a life befitting a man. Aristotle notes also that the happy life is not found in the political life, in the life of honor. Honor is something that is given to us by others. It depends on how others view us. Now, whatever the happy life is, it is not something that is dependent on how others perceive us. It is something that is found within us, irrespective of other people's opinions. People can easily change their opinions of us. But whatever happiness is, it is not something that can easily be lost. If it were, then we'd never be at rest. We'd have to constantly chase it. But it seems absurd to call a restless person happy. Again, the happy life is not found in chasing after wealth. Money is a means to an end. We don't enjoy money for money's sake. We use money to get stuff. But happiness is the end goal that we all seek. We do everything ultimately for the sake of being happy. Now, since money making is a means, but happiness is an end, money making is not synonymous with happiness or the happy life. The pagan philosopher Aristotle thus shows us that the happy life is not found in the life of pleasure, honor, or money making. He argues that it is found in the life of wisdom, the life of contemplation. And that makes sense. When we consider the life of a wise man, it seems odd to say that a wise man lives an unhappy life. If a man were wise, then he seems to have known what happiness is and seems to have lived that kind of life. The wise man lives the happy life. So far then, we have established that we cannot desire what we don't know, and that we all desire happiness. Therefore, we all have at least some vague sort of knowledge of what happiness is. Then we saw how the pagan philosopher Aristotle clarifies what happiness is by getting rid of some false ideas while establishing that the wise man is the one who knows the happy life. This brings us to the next problem or difficulty. How do we know which men are wise? Where is the wise man? And is there even such a man? To answer this, we have to know what wisdom is. But here we run into a paradox. Don't we have to be wise in order to know wisdom? Now, of course, we all have some vague and confused knowledge of what wisdom is, which actually brings us to our third point. Our third point is this: the philosopher is one who seeks wisdom. He might not be wise yet, but he at least seeks for wisdom. As a philosopher, he is a lover and friend, philo, of wisdom, Sophia. So philosophy, its etymology, comes from philo, friend, lover, and Sophia. So philosophia, philosopher, a lover of wisdom, a friend to wisdom. And this point is not very controversial. For example, the pagan mathematician and philosopher Pythagoras understood philosophy to be the love of wisdom. And not just any wisdom, not human wisdom, the wisdom that, say, a craftsman might have of his craft, but he is a lover of divine wisdom. This is the same point that the pagan philosopher Socrates makes in his work, in Plato's work, The Apology, where Socrates gives a defense of his life. Socrates says that human wisdom is worth little or nothing. What the philosopher seeks is the wisdom of God. So if philosophy is the love or friendship with wisdom, and the wisdom that the philosopher seeks is divine or godly, then philosophy is the love or friendship with God. This is merely the teaching of the pagans, not the Christian, or not Christianity alone. So this takes us to our fourth point. Though the philosopher is one who desires wisdom, that is, he desires friendship with God, he cannot actually be friends with God through any natural means. This is proven by the systematizer of geometry, the pagan Greek mathematician Euclid. In Book 5, Definition 4 of his Elements of Geometry, Euclid notes that there cannot be a relationship between a finite and infinite magnitude. They are without relation. But friendship is a kind of relation. Therefore, it is not possible for a finite thing to be friends with an infinite thing. But since man is finite and God infinite, it is impossible for God and man to be friends. Now, this point is confirmed in a few places. First, in Aristotle. In his Ethics, Book 8, Chapter 7, Aristotle notes that man cannot be friends with God. This is because God infinitely surpasses us in every good thing. So there cannot be a relation then between man and God. Not only is this confirmed by the philosopher Aristotle, but it is also confirmed by the Greek poet Homer in his work The Iliad. In Homer's Iliad, Hector, who is only a man, is called dear to Zeus. But Achilles, a demigod, is called the one whom Zeus loved. So the non-Christian thinkers then leave us with a very odd paradox. On the one hand, man's happiness requires friendship with God. On the other hand, it is impossible to be friends with God. So on the very grounds of the philosophers then, it is impossible to be happy. So we all desire the happy life, but no one can be happy. This is the conclusion that the philosophers leave us with. But if we look to the biblical life of Christ, we find that Christ invites us to be his friends. He says, "I will not call you servants, for the servant knoweth not what his Lord doth, but I have called you friends." If Jesus is God, wisdom incarnate, and God is the wisdom whom we seek, then because of the incarnation and through being friends with Christ, with wisdom incarnate, we can attain the wisdom we desire. We can be happy. Christianity does not offer a replacement of the philosophical life, a life in search of happiness. It claims to offer the completion of such a life. But let's not be too hasty. Just because Christianity claims to offer the happy life, it doesn't immediately follow that it actually does. Anybody can claim anything. So why be a Christian? Let us consider two sets of facts. First, Christ claims to be God, and either he is God or he isn't. There is no middle ground. Secondly, either we believe that Jesus is God or we don't. There is no middle ground. And so there are four possibilities. First, Jesus is God and we believe that he is God. Second, Jesus is God and we don't believe that he is God. Third, Jesus is not God, but we believe him to be God. And finally, Jesus is not God and we do not believe him to be God. Let us first consider the two cases in which Jesus is not God. If Jesus is not God, then friendship with Christ is not really a friendship with God. Now, as we've already seen, man must be friends with God if he wishes to be happy. This was proven by the philosophers. Regardless of our belief then, if Jesus is not God, then man cannot be happy. He still remains unhappy. Let us now consider the two cases in which Christ is God. If Jesus is God, then man will either believe or not believe him to be God. If we believe Christ to be God, then we can accept Christ's invitation to friendship and be made happy. But if we do not believe Christ to be God, even if he really is, then we end up declining his invitation to friendship and remain unhappy. Now, each position, each possibility, I should say, has a necessary outcome. First, Jesus is God and we believe him to be God. If that's the case, then we can be happy. The second is that if Jesus is God and we don't believe him to be God, then we remain unhappy. Third, if Jesus is not God, but we believe him to be God, we remain unhappy. Fourth, if Jesus is not God and we do not believe him to be God, again, we remain unhappy. So there is then a best case scenario and a worst case scenario for believing and not believing that Christ is God. So if we believe that Christ is God, the best case scenario is that we can be happy, while the worst case scenario is that we remain unhappy. But if we believe that Jesus is not God, then the best case scenario is we remain unhappy, while the worst case scenario is we remain unhappy. So in other words, the best and worst case scenario for not believing that Christ is God is that we remain unhappy. They're the same case scenario. So in short, the only possible way to be happy is if we believe that Christ is God and he actually is. If we wrongly believe that he is and he actually isn't, then we are as unhappy as those who do not believe Christ is God. In believing, we have nothing to lose and everything to gain. Now recall that we started with the fact that no one can desire what they do not know. So how is it that we all desire happiness when we haven't seen or known the happy life? We desire it because Christ calls us to the happy life. This is something that Christ calls us to. St. John, in one of his letters, reminds us that we love because God loved us first. Actually, God loves us first. We are currently being loved by God. So the fact that we pursue happiness and wisdom is actually because God calls us to pursue him. God seeks us out first before we seek him. So if philosophy is the search for God, then we can think of sacred doctrine, or really revelation, as God's search for us. So why am I a Christian? I am a Christian because Christ has offered his friendship to me, as he did to us all. So my hope is that you, the viewer, that you were to consider saying yes to this friendship that Christ offers to you. And so I hope this video was helpful. If you have questions, please feel free to leave a comment. Otherwise, God bless.